Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
After more than 20 years in the limelight, former President Bill Clinton still in the public arena. His main focus now, his foundation and the Clinton Global Initiative. He says he's out of politics, but that's hard to believe, given that his wife is running for president. When Hillary Clinton put on a strong performance at the first Democratic debate in Las Vegas, it seemed to reignite her campaign. A campaign which had suffered earlier this summer when criticism of Hillary's private email use as Secretary of State saw many supporters flock to her main Democratic opponent, Bernie Sanders, instead. It's been the sort of back-and-forth political campaign her husband is familiar with as well. Meanwhile, across the world, in the Middle East, the war in Syria has taken a dramatic turn with the Russian military support for the Assad regime. And then, a very volatile situation in Israeli-occupied territories, leading to fears of a total meltdown between the Palestinians and the Israelis. But Bill Clinton, who dealt extensively with both sides as president, is surprisingly optimistic. He thinks there's a potential for a Palestinian deal with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And in Syria, he says Russian President Putin and Barack Obama can work out some sort of understanding. Why is he saying all this? We will find out as Bill Clinton talks to Al Jazeera. Mr. President, thank you for doing this. Great to see you again.
Thank you.
What do you think the United States could practically do in terms of dealing with the issue of refugees, both as a humanitarian issue, but also as a political issue resulting from what started in Syria in 2011?
Well, first, I think we have to do whatever we can to stabilize the situation within Syria so that civilians are not combatants or not collateral damage so much. That would make a big difference. They've already got half the country displaced between the millions who have left and the millions who are displaced within Syria. I noticed last week 2 competing factions within Syria agreed to move the populations to match where the security for them was. That was a good sign. I know that the initial reports of President Obama's meeting with President Putin have not been too encouraging, but I think they ought to keep working on it. Instead of trying to tie the future of President al-Assad to whatever Russia and the U.S. do now, which I think is an error, it looks to me like what they're trying to do is to say, is there a way we can all work together on defeating ISIS? And if we do that, then we can go back to arguing about the political process necessary for Syria's future. That's important. The next thing I think we should be doing is giving more aid to the 2 most vulnerable big receivers of Syrians and Iraqis in the region, Jordan and Lebanon, where the whole region is very dependent on these 2 small non-oil producing complex, multi-faceted nations to survive this and to thrive. And they've been doing yeoman's work, but they need more help. And then thirdly, I think we have to take some more refugees. The president's going to take some, but we have quite a number of Syrians in the United States now. They've done really well, and they're very well respected and popular in the places where they live in America. So I think those 3 things are the things we should be focused on. But the best thing we could do for the Syrians would be to try to calm down and create safe havens for people within Syria.
Now, in terms of what the Russians are doing in Syria, and I'm sure you've heard this argument, there are people who are arguing that what Putin has done was to hoodwink the United States in not just Syria, in that part of the world, in the Middle East. But there are others who are saying, what else could we have done given the circumstances? What's your take on it?
Well, he didn't exactly hoodwink us. He just didn't do what we thought he was going to do. I think he did what he's been doing all along. President Putin has essentially 19th century view of Russia's greatness. That is, he thinks it's very important for them to, as far as they can, control all the countries on their border, which explains what he's done in Ukraine. And he believes that he has to maintain an influence in the Middle East, which we have no problem with. Russia and the United States were the co-sponsors of the original peace talks in the Middle East peace process right before I became president. But he thinks he can only exercise that influence in opposition to the United States and to Europe. Just like Ukraine, I believe he missed a terrific opportunity to make an agreement with Europe to make Ukraine a bridge between Europe and Russia in a way that would be prosperous for Russia, for Europe, and for Ukraine. So as long as he has a different worldview of how Russia can restore its greatness, we're going to have these conflicts. Nonetheless, he surely does not want ISIS to succeed, because it won't be long before that infects the rest of Muslim populations on his southern underbelly. So I still believe we need to see if we can straighten this out and see, because if we work together for the purpose of blocking the gains of ISIS and understood that we would have differences of opinion about how to handle Syria if we can get this under control, that's what's best for the Syrians, that's what's best for the region, and I think in the long run it's what's best for Russia.
I mean, listening to what you're saying, Mr. President, one gets the feeling that you think that there is absolutely no risk that the United States could be sucked in militarily in Syria to counter Putin in any shape or form.
Look, only the president should speak for the United States on military issues. So I don't want to comment on that. I'm just saying that it's not clear to me, just because the opening salvo was sour, that we won't be able to reach some sort of understanding, particularly if, we have been giving military equipment support to the Syrian forces that we believe offer the best hope for stability in Syria's future. It's an ancient, complex, multi-ethnic, multi-religious society. It deserves an inclusive, representative government. And its people do not deserve to be the victims of chemical warfare from their own government. So we need to do something about that. But right now, you've got ISIS in Iraq, you've got ISIS in Syria, you've got renewed troubles in Afghanistan. None of these things are really very good for Russia. And they don't have a good record trying to solve the problems on their own. Look what happened in Afghanistan. So it seems to me there needs to be a global coalition to deal with it. And I think that in the end, we'll just have to keep working with it. I don't know if it'll work out or not, but I'm not prepared to give up just because Mr. Putin's opening gambit was to, in effect, demonstrate what his view of Russian greatness is.
You were associated in the minds of many people in the Arab world with the peace process, and you mentioned it a little while ago. Recently, we've had the Palestinian flag hoisted at the United Nations. When you look at what's happened between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but also around the Israelis and the Palestinians over the last 10 years, up to date today, how hopeful are you that a solution, two-state solution or otherwise, could still be achieved?
Well, if you just looked at what happened, you wouldn't be very hopeful. I think in the last, 8 or 10 years, Mr. Netanyahu and President Abbas met personally 3 times. When Hillary was Secretary of State, they did have 3 meetings. But I wouldn't give up on it for the simple reason that Israel, still worried about Iran, has a lot of common interest with the Palestinians' neighbors, Sunni neighbors. And the recently deceased king of Saudi Arabia mobilized more than 20 Muslim countries to offer Israel full normal relations if they made a peace with the Palestinians. Today, the Palestinians are still living on land in the West Bank they got when I was president, with agreements with Prime Minister Rabin, an agreement that cost him his life, and with then Prime Minister Ehud Barak. I wouldn't put it beyond the pale of possibility that the overwhelming preoccupation of both the Arab states and the Israelis, which is given the peaceful nature of the West Bank government and the success the Palestinians have had there, has allowed them to ignore the Palestinians' long-term aspirations, which is why their flag's flying at the UN today, right? But I also wouldn't put it past the conditions to actually make an agreement more likely, because look what we're dealing with. You've got, Jordan was already a majority Palestinian state. Then they got a lot of Egyptians because of the downside of the Arab Spring. Now they've got this huge number of Syrians. Lebanon nearly destroyed itself in the 70s and has survived all the upheavals of the last 25 years because they have this unique constitution which mandates shared decision-making. You know, so you've got a Sunni prime minister and a Shia speaker of the assembly and a Maronite Christian president and a Druze head of the Supreme Court. And they've proved supple. They've endured the involvement of the Syrians. They've endured the Hezbollah transiting through there and training in the Bekaa Valley. They've endured all kinds of things. I think it's not inconceivable we could have a mega effort there because a lot of the Arab states are saying to Israel, look, we'd like to join you in this and guarantee that Iran doesn't threaten our security, our stability, or our serenity in the future. But we got to resolve this. Now, how long do they have to provide peaceful, lawful, nonviolent government before they can get their state? Mr. Netanyahu's problem previously was that he had so many people on his right that were part of his coalition. The last election in Israel, everybody talked about how well Netanyahu did. True. But Labor actually picked up 2 seats. He did well by collapsing the opposition on his right and having them come to him. So he is now in a better position than he's been in a long time to make some sort of more comprehensive agreement with the Palestinians, if, but only if, he can sell it as part of a rapprochement with people who will help them be secure against terror and Iran. So, you know, it might happen. I wouldn't write it off. Netanyahu's a clever man. He may finally be able to get there. But I think that Palestinians on the West Bank don't get the credit they deserve for operating a peaceful, successful, slowly improving government. And I think that's what the UN recognition reflects.
CGI has been around for 10 years. What's it been like working through CGI as opposed to working through the presidency when you were president?
Well, the good news is, you know, you can get people together who have no political interest in disagreeing with you, and vice versa, I mean, all the parties. And what I've been trying to do is to develop a model of problem solving that I hope will take hold in the modern world, where you get all the stakeholders together, you agree on the end, and then you can have all the differences you want over what's the best way to accomplish this, but eventually you settle on something and you just do the job. And I think it's been very rewarding to me because, you know, here in the United States, I have support from members of my own party, members of the other party. We have people all around the world helping us, and it's worked very well. These networks of cooperation, I think, work better in complex environments than individuals or individual countries or individual businesses trying to solve problems alone.
Now, when you talk to people outside the United States in various parts of the world and you ask them about CGI, they all say CGI has done great things for us in all manner of spheres. When you talk to people here in the United States, at least some of them have a different perspective on CGI. What's it been like for you managing this equation of how it's seen in the U.S. and how it's seen outside the U.S.?
Well, I think it's seen very well in the U.S., except in political season when people, for their own reasons, seek to disagree. I think there are a lot of people who write about politics. This is not a criticism, it's an observation, who see everything through a political lens, and therefore they like things neat and divided, like this is the realm of politics, this is the realm of business, this is the realm of charity. What I'm trying to do is get everybody together to solve problems faster, cheaper, lower cost. Then as long as anybody in my family is involved in a political race, then the foundation, everything we do is fair game. All I can do is explain to people what we do, tell them what the consequences were, and disclose all the donors. There's nothing else I can do. But I think in the end, we've held up pretty well. We still get a lot of support out of America every year, but a lot of support in other countries as well, as you know.
I'd like to talk about that someone from your family who's involved in the political race later on. But in terms of CGI doing stuff outside the United States, what is, you look back over 10 years, what is the one thing that you are more proud of than any other that you've been able to achieve for people outside the United States through CGI?
Well, through CGI, that is just through our partners, we've got many things that have affected millions of people. A total of 430 million people have received some benefits. But I'll just give you one example. Procter & Gamble agreed to partner with a lot of other people who work with us, including my foundation, in the work we do separate from CGI. And they promised to save one person an hour through clean water every day of every week as long as they exist. And they're up to about 9 billion packets of this clean water now that gives each packet costs 10 cents, and it gives a family of 4 enough water to get by for 3 days or so. That's symbolic of the kinds of things we've done. With my own foundation, the healthcare work we did now has led to spinning off into an independent body, the health work, because they get so much government support now from all over the world. More than half the people with AIDS on Earth who are staying alive got it off contracts negotiated by our foundation. 3/4 of all the children. I'm proud of that. In our foundation work, I am very, very proud of the work that we've done with small farmers and with rural people, especially women that never earned a living before in their lives. The things that I'm most proud of are those that empower people to solve their own problems. We're helping Rwanda to retrain its entire workforce in healthcare so that they don't have to take any foreign assistance by 2020 just to run a healthcare system. And that's very important. I guess in recent years, through CGI alone, the thing I'm most proud of is that we had the largest airlift since the Berlin airlift in response to the Ebola crisis. We got our partners together last year in 2014 and delivered 100 tons of medical supplies on the day CGI started to Sierra Leone and Liberia and Guinea, and then the same partners stayed together. We wound up delivering 500 tons of medical supplies. No government involvement, just partners doing it together. We work with the governments there on the ground to distribute it and everything, but I'm very, very proud of that. That shows you what you can do.
Mr. President, if I may ask you to look ahead, both in terms of CGI, but also in terms of U.S. foreign policy. Now, let us say, for argument's sake, that Hillary Clinton became president of the United States at some point, and she started doing things outside the United States which people think are good things. Do you think that or do you hope that they would see those good things as being done by the United States of America, or by Hillary Clinton if she becomes president, or by CGI, since the Clinton name is associated with CGI?
By the United States. If she does things if she gets elected president and she does things which are good for the world, I would hope they'd be seen as done by the United States. For example, I'll give you an example from her Secretary of State's time. I think probably the best thing President Bush did in office was PEPFAR, the initiative on AIDS. When he left office, we were keeping, just the U.S. government taxpayers were giving life-saving medicine to 1.7 million people. As Secretary of State, she had jurisdiction over PEPFAR, and she and her director, with no more money, bought all generic drugs from other countries and went from 1.7 to 5.1, 3.4 million lives with one decision that cost no more money. That's a very big deal. The United States did that, and I think that's the way she would feel as president. That's what I hope. What I try to do is to work with governments, and except for 2 small contracts where our healthcare unit was contracted by the Center for Disease Control because they could do something in foreign countries no one else could do. We don't take any government money from the U.S., and we shouldn't. So all the governments that support me are non-American governments, and then we just work in partnerships. And I think people will get used to making a distinction. I work with the United States government. The U.S. government's funding this program to retrain the workforce in Rwanda in healthcare, but we don't take any of the money. I raise the money from other people to do our part of the work.
Now, if I may open up a couple of parentheses, the election campaign now, there are people who were saying that the Clinton name, in terms of this particular election, has lost its mojo. It's not what it used to be. That Hillary Clinton is not doing as well as people had expected. What is your take on what's going on in the election campaign now?
Well, I think first of all, the Republicans are very gifted at political strategy. And if they see someone they think can beat them, they try to tear them down early. And the political press has a vested interest in having a race. They just want to see a race. So they were never going to give her the race. So they did, this is the 8th congressional hearing on Benghazi. First time in the history of America that a tragedy like this has been so politicized. All the other 7 committees were also chaired by Republicans. They found that she didn't do anything wrong, and she, in fact, rushed to implement the recommendations of the nonpartisan commission about how to improve security. So they start making a big deal about her emails. Everyone in the government knew, whoever got an email from her or sent an email to her, that she was using her own email as was permitted at the time. So they tried to make it look like it's some big surprise. And I think that she'll get over it. Some people in the press took after my foundation because they wanted to hurt her. This is all about politics. And what I think you do have to realize is, in our country, it's a contact sport. I mean, you have to expect to be hit. And it's really flattering in a way because what this means is they're not attacking anybody else in the Democratic primary, which means the Republicans believe she can win and they think they can beat anybody else. So what I always tell people is they have to understand, now the people who don't want her to win have recommended to you Democrats to please give them someone else to run against. And you have to decide whether you're going to let the Republicans decide who should be your nominee or not. And I think, we just have to be laughable and answer the serious questions seriously. If they ask a serious email question, answer the question. But get back to the issue. The American people desperately want more broadly shared prosperity. We've had too much inequality. They want to live in a world that is less unstable, but they know we can't solve a lot of these problems all by ourselves and shouldn't try and won't be welcomed if we do try. So the job of the next president is to try to restore more broad-based prosperity, which you've had exactly once in 50 years in the 1990s, where each 20%, each quintile of the American economy grew together. And to try to keep big bad things from happening in the world and make as much good happen as possible. I think by light years she's the best qualified person to get that done. So I feel it'll work out in the end.
Okay.
But campaigns are contentious. You go up and down, you can't worry about that. And I'm not in politics, so I don't know if I'm very effective because everybody seems to be really angry this year, and I'm not mad at anybody. I'm a happy grandfather, and I love my foundation.
Mr. President, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.